So let me take you through the what we're going to talk about today. This notion of putting canaries in coal mines, which is fun. But for those of you who attended the keynote, my name is, or didn't attend the keynote, my name is Ed Kless. You can see my particulars there. If you want to contact me, please just connect with me at ed.kless@verasage.com. And I did mention in the earlier presentation that I do a radio show / podcast with a guy by the name of Ron Baker. Some of you might know Ron as well. And that's available on thesoulofenterprise.com. And once you go there, you can sign up for all at all places podcasts. So just nothing to say other than a free podcast. But welcome again. I see some familiar names out in the chat, so thank you for attending. Appreciate that. But so why would we put a canary in a coal mine? Why would we do that? There's our picture. There's our canary in the coal mine. And I think some of you may know this story, but it is an interesting one anyway. And that is, it is a theory that since the canary was considered to be a very delicate bird, that the miners would bring a canary in a cage, and they would bring it into a coal mine, and they would observe the canary's behavior. And if the canary, keeled over, they were like, okay, we got to get out of here because there's some kind of noxious fumes or gases that are leaking into the place. And that was, so it was meant as a harbinger, a signal that, hey, we've got to get out of here. Of course, now we have much more sophisticated equipment, and thank goodness we do, because it turns out that this theory was not all that good. It had a lot to do with where you position the canary. Whether you position the canary up high or down low. It also had to deal with the type of gas that was potentially leaking into where you were and where it was leaking from, because some gases are lighter than air, some are heavier than air. And, a couple times they went down and found that the miners were dead, and there was the canary up on the top shelf singing away because the gas hadn't gone up that high. So wasn't necessarily the best theory, but nevertheless, it's become the saying for what's our canary in the coal mine. So what is that? And we're going to talk more about that when we talk about measuring what matters, because the subtitle of this presentation is measuring what matters to customers. To customers being the operative phrase. Most of you, I'm sure, have heard this: what you can measure, you can manage. This quote, often attributed to Peter Drucker, is not Peter Drucker. He never said that, and never said anything to that degree. He did say something close, and I searched through Peter Drucker's works, which I have many of myself, and then also the online Google book search when that was available. Sadly, it no longer is, of all of Peter's works. And he never said what you can measure, you can manage, nor did he say what you can't manage, or what you can't measure, you can't manage. So he didn't say it in the inverse. He did say something along the lines of what you measure, you will get. What you measure, you will get. Which is very different from what you can measure, you can manage. What you measure, you will get. And I think that is often true, but here's a problem with that theory, similar to the problem with the canary in the coal mine theory, is what you measure, you will get. The most horrific example of this is the Robert McNamara's use of body count during the Vietnam War. This was in fact, McNamara, even in his autobiography, published several decades after what went on in Vietnam, admitted as much, said this was a mistake, said it was one of the biggest mistakes of his life, his career. And the idea was, of course, is that we want to measure how many Viet Cong we were disposing of. And this was a great measure, or thought to be a great measure, because it was easy to roll up. You count them. You can put it in a report. That report goes up the chain of command, rolls all the way on up. We get a number at the top, at the pinnacle, and they go, oh, here's the body count for this day, this week, this month. The problem is that wasn't necessarily counting deaths of Viet Cong, but just total deaths. And yes, if you shot and killed one Viet Cong, there was one less Viet Cong. However, if you took out someone who was not Viet Cong, you potentially created 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 more, because of that person's family that you disposed of would come back to haunt you. And as a result, more and more of the native Vietnamese were joining in cahoots with the Viet Cong because we were taking people out. So this is a very example, but it was a great example of this whole notion of what you measure, you will get. What you measure, you will get. And oftentimes with catastrophic consequences. But we're here to tell a little bit more positive story. So what I want to begin to share with you is some ideas around creating measurements that will be much more effective in your organization. So first thing I want to do is to talk a little bit about how economists classify what they call their key indicators. There's three basic types of indicators according to the economic. Many of these are available, National Labor Relations Board, all of that kind of stuff. But the first type of indicator is what's known as a lagging indicator. So it lags behind what's actually happening in the economy. Of course, unemployment is a great example of this, right? The unemployment doesn't start and then the economy slows down. It works the other way, right? When the economy slows down, that's when unemployment. So you recognize it after the fact. Prime rate is also a lagging indicator as well. And if you hear about the Fed, they will admit as such that we're raising it today, but we'll have to hopefully lower it at some point, but we won't know that until after the economy turns around. So it's a lagging indicator. Then we have coincident indicators, and you guys are pretty familiar with these. This would be like your day's sales if you're in a retail store or even in a professional service organization. So what's our in real time? What's our sales for today? So that's coincident indicators. But then what are called leading indicators. Leading indicators. So these are things that economists look for that say, okay, these are somewhat predictive of what we think is going to happen at some point in the future. So good example would be, let's use building permits. If we get an increase to the number of building permits in a particular downtown area, well, then we can predict that it's more likely that we're going to see some jobs, get construction jobs coming there in the near future because we've got these permits and the people are going to start building, right? So that's a leading indicator of what's happening from an economic standpoint. And if you're looking at this, I want you to describe what are the indicators that you use in your organization for your measurements? Are they lagging? Are they coincident? Or are they leading? And what I find is almost in more times than not, let's call it even 90+% of cases, when I talk to partner organizations and I say, what are your top 3 performance indicators that you're looking for? They will name something that is either a lagging indicator or a coincident indicator. Very few organizations that I've come across have put in place leading indicators. So let's talk about why this is. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're immersed in data. We live data. We live data. There's lots and lots of data that gets generated by the systems that we do. So as a result, we tend to get in the mix around data. And we talk even about data-driven decisions in organizations. Well, forgetting that the late great Clayton Christensen said, the only way to see into the future is to use a theory because conclusive data is only available about the past. This is clearly indicated in the participle phrase accounting, right? We are accounting for it. It's a past participle, right? We're accounting for it. It's what happened in the past. All accounting and the majority of finance data is about the past. Is there? So it's not leading. I mean, unless your theory is tomorrow is like yesterday plus 10%. Well, I guess that's a theory. It's probably just as good as the canary in the coal mine theory. They're not, in other words, not a very good one, right? So what are we doing to create things that are truly theoretical, so that we can say, all right, well, this is what if this happens, we believe this will be the outcome. And when we do this, we need to know that we need to construct a theory. And the way we do this is going back to some of your science classes in high school and college, is that we observe. We first see we try to figure out what's going on based on our observations of what we see. Pretty straightforward there. Then we try to categorize and rank what's important using a concept called Occam's razor, which is an idea that the simplest solution is the most likely. The most likely. So the simplest solution is the most likely explanation for what's happening. Then we either make a prediction or explanation. So retrospectively, we try to say, okay, this happened, therefore this happened. Okay. And then we have to posit it and predict it in the future, that we say, okay, now that we've seen this trend, what we now have to see is if this variable continues to change in the manner with which that we want it, does it make this other variable change the way that we want it to happen? Right. So that's how we break down and construct a theory. I think far too often business people just get stuck in the well, what have other people done? But again, most of the metrics that you see out there are actually backward looking and not forward looking. So that's what we want to talk about today, is like how we're going to do that. So I'd like you to do what Einstein called a Gedanken experiment. This is a thought experiment. Einstein was a brilliant user of these. If you read or know any of the work that he did, the idea for the general theory of relativity came to him while he was looking out his office, the patent office, and saw a train go by, and that's when he understood the idea of relative versus absolute, and that's when it occurred to him what was happening in time space, as he coined the phrase. But I want you to do this Gedanken experiment with me and say, okay, if you are the CEO, let's say, of American Airlines, and you want to be able to predict what the likelihood of the people on this plane flying your airline again, what would you look to? And let me, by the way, I don't mean do they have a return ticket? Okay, no kidding. All right, I got it. But they book another trip. Let's put it that way. That they will book another trip with you. What is the likelihood that they would do this? And it turns out that in the airline industry, they have this nailed down. In fact, they call it the Triple Crown. The first thing is on-time performance. Did the plane leave when it said it was going to and land when they said it was going to within that window of time? And yes, I know that they predict longer than it actually should, and they're allowed to do that based on certain parameters. But for the most part, what they're tracking there is this on-time performance, excluding weather events, stuff like that they're not responsible for. Okay. The second thing they track is lost luggage. And then the third thing they track is customer complaints. So this is known as the Triple Crown. The airlines look at these: on-time performance, lost luggage, customer complaints. And as you look at these, let's make some observations about them. And a couple things come to mind on this. Number one, notice this is what they use to predict the future of whether or not somebody's going to come back and fly their airline. None of these appear on the financial statement. None of these are on the balance sheet or income statement or even statement of cash flows. Right? So they're not looking at financial numbers to predict future financial performance. They're not doing it. What else about these? A lot of people in the organization can impact one or more of these things. Certainly the pilots, the people the baggage handlers, the people stocking and cleaning the plane, the people loading the plane up with supplies, the ticket clerks behind the counters, the people at the gate agents. So the pilot, I think I mentioned the pilots. All of these are customer facing, and a lot of people can influence. Now, isn't it interesting though that perhaps the one or two departments that really do not influence these or has less of an influence on these are finance, right? The finance and accounting people don't have much influence over any of these things. I guess maybe customer complaints if they do something stupid with ticket prices or something. But for the most part, these things are not impacted by people in finance and marketing too, by the way. So that's another observation. So they don't appear on a financial statement, and a huge number of people inside the organization do have can be a proponent of these and have an impact on the customer. All right. So what I'd like you to do is begin to think of this stuff instead of key performance indicators, which again, performance is oftentimes about the past. Performance, how did we perform? And instead try to come up with inside your organization some predictive indicators. What are predictive? So, and notice that they define success the way the customer defines success. Back to this slide here, all three of these things are directly related to customers: on-time performance, lost luggage, and customer complaints. Okay, so they're directly customer facing. So how is it that we can measure success the way the customer, your customers, define success? So I'm going to share with you what my ideas for what I think should be perhaps the big three inside professional organizations, and perhaps even those of you who are customers as well. So here's my big three. The first one is called high satisfaction days. More on that in just a second. Turnaround time and value gap. And we're going to take each one of these in turn. High satisfaction days is a real easy concept. I don't have any slides on it other than to say HSD. It simply asks this question. Inside your organization, when a particular individual has a day on which they are highly satisfied, I want you to count those days. And simplest mechanism from a technology standpoint would be to set up an email address, hsd@yourdomain.com. And when somebody has a high satisfaction day, they should send an email to hsd@yourdomain.com. And maybe with just in the subject line, description of why they are having a high satisfaction day. And what is a high satisfaction day? Well, we're going to leave that up to the professional to decide. We're going to leave that up to each individual to say, yeah, I think I did good today. I thought, yes, I want to pump this. I did something good. Now, what's most interesting about this, especially in professional organizations, is why do most HSDs occur? And what we found, the people who do this and track this, is that they are usually in some way customer related. They solved a particularly difficult problem for a customer. They closed a sale, perhaps, to a customer. So all of it, it's interesting that how many of these internal high satisfaction days of the individual colleagues inside the organization are externally facing. Ultimately, they're not about internal, although they certainly can be from time to time. Organizations that have put this into practice have noticed that when they see an increase over time in HSDs, because after all, what you can just do is go to this email address and see all of the HSDs that have accumulated in your organization. And by the way, if you're a sole proprietor, that's fine too. Just get yourself a whiteboard and very, very simple technology, and count them. And what they see is that as high satisfaction days seem to increase on a weekly or monthly basis, it is predictive of future financial performance increasing in 30 to 60 days. Pretty interesting. So test this theory. This may not work for you, but in the organizations where I've seen this put into practice, it's actually predictive of future financial performance when you see an increase to high satisfaction days. And yes, the opposite is true as well. When we're seeing declines in high satisfaction days, we're looking and seeing a decline in financial performance of the organization as well. So HSD is very, very simple concept. So that's one of the what I'll call the triple crown for us. Next, turnaround time. Now this one is pretty straightforward. I'm sure some of you even do this to a certain extent already. But I think there's a couple things that I want to point out with regard to turnaround time. Now, turnaround time can be tracked. And what do I mean by turnaround time? It's stuff that has to be done for customers. And it's on-time performance for us, right? It's on-time performance, like the airline. Did we do what we said we were going to do in a timely manner? And you can look at this at three different levels, and you might want to start out at the highest level and then work your way down to the others. But the first level might be at the engagement or job or project or matter, whatever you call it. Did we achieve that performance, that engagement on time? Yes or no? Okay, so yes or no. Now, what you can then do is if you've successfully broken down your engagements, which you should, into distinct and separate objectives, those objectives should have target dates that are associated with them as well. And you can say, all right, well, there were 5 objectives for this particular engagement. Did we achieve those objectives on time? Did we educate the customer? Did we successfully convert some data set? Did we successfully create the reports that they needed to have a successful implementation? So those might be examples of objectives. And then the last level might be what I'll call the discrete issue, task, result, to do. So it's the sum total of these would be the achievement of an objective. So in a data conversion situation, it might be, you know, the overall data conversion would be one objective of the engagement, but then I might break out the data conversion piece into discrete units of, you know, history, current, open transactions, whatever you want to talk about, and break them into things, and then you can measure that at a more discrete level. And again, what you want to do is track the on-time performance. Now, this presupposes the bottom bullet on the left-hand side of the slide, in that you must, when you're tracking this stuff, you must preserve your original estimated completion date in order to be able to do this properly. Because if your completion date has a moving target and can be adjusted, and by the way, I do think that completion date can change, and sometimes it's, you know, at customer request, and I get that. But what we really want to track, if we're doing this well, is tracking against the original estimated completion date for each of the different levels that we talked about earlier, and tracking against that, not against an adjusted. But again, and I guess you could do it against adjusted too, but, you know, then it becomes almost a self-licking ice cream cone, right? I mean, you're always because we just keep pushing out the completion date, and, well, surprise, surprise, look, we completed it on time. All right, so you want to make sure you preserve that original. And then there's 2 metrics that you can look at with regard to this. First, certainly your percentage completion, right? So if your particular engagement has 100 issues overall on it, and 90 out of 100 are completed, well, you can say, well, we're 90% complete this project. So if we have that set up, but then I also want you to track is, of those that are completed, what percent did you complete on or before the original estimated completion date? So say, you know, the example I use, 90 out of 100 are complete, 90%. Okay, so what percent of those 90 did you achieve on or before the original estimated completion date? And say that was, I don't know, I'll make the math easy, 45 out of 90. So 45 out of the 90 were completed on or before the original estimated completion date. That's 50%. I would submit to you that that is predictive of probably a very unsatisfied customer at that point. So regardless of whether it's your fault, their fault, doesn't matter. My guess is that engagement is not going to be good. Now, what I like about this too is that it is predictive relatively early on. So let's take that same 100 issue engagement, and let's say that we have only completed 10% of them, because it's early on. All right, so 10 out of the 100 are done, 10% completion. Okay, great. Important question. Of those 10 that are completed, what percentage of those were completed on or before the original estimated completion date? And I would submit to you that if it's 9 out of 10 of them, we're doing pretty good. We're on target. Things are going well. If it's only 1 out of 10, we're already seeing this is going sideways on us much earlier in the engagement, even though only 10% of it is done. But if only 10% of those 10 things were completed on or before the original estimated completion date, we're going sideways. We're going sideways pretty quickly. So I like this notion of that's another reason to preserve that original. So HSDs, turnaround time. And then I've got about 5 minutes left, and we're going to talk about the last one, and then maybe I'll take some questions. Might have a little bit of time for just a few questions on this stuff. So if you have them, I am not seeing, by the way, the questions or comments. So if you have them, do go into that, and I will go into that after the presentation is complete. But the last one is this thing called value gap. Value gap, and there are 2 forms: there's a basic and an advanced. And let's talk about the basic. It's pretty straightforward. So you need 3 pieces of information. You need all of your customers' names. Pretty sure you got that. And then I want that customer's the revenue from that customer for some discrete period of time. And by discrete period of time, it can be all time, life to date. That's fine too. It can be last year, last 2 years, last 3 years. Anyway, you pick, but you have to have some discrete time period. All right. So customer name, revenue from that discrete period of time. And then I want you to ask this question of yourselves. How much value did you provide for that customer in that period? And I want you to go through the exercise. Like, how much money did you save them? How did you reduce cost? How did you help increase sales? And go through the exercise of trying to figure that out. I want you to come up with a number, or you should come up with a number, in most cases, that is significantly higher than the revenue number. That's the way this whole thing is supposed to work. Right. So what we want to do is say, oh, okay, we provided them $1 million in value. We charged them $100,000. Our value gap is now 900,000, which is great. Right. So that's the difference between those two things. The advanced, and by the way, I don't suggest doing the advanced until after you've done the basic for about a year or two, because the advanced really requires that you have had a Gedanken experiments about each individual value creation conversation with the current set of customers. But the advances say, okay, what value could we provide over some future discrete period of time to this customer? So what value, because this in the advanced, we want to ask the value question first. What value could we provide to this customer in some future period, the next 2 years? And what would be a possible acceptable price for that value provided? What I love about value gap, and here's a spreadsheet, by the way, and I can get this out to you if you send me an email, ed.kless@verasage.com, and just write value gap in your subject line. I will send you the spreadsheet, but you can rebuild it. It's not very hard, but I'm happy to send it out. What I love about it is the fact that it doesn't matter what the numbers are. It's the process of developing the numbers, especially those around value, that create the value in this exercise. It's hard though, and I'm going to leave you with this thought, that the value of the value of a measurement, should be a measurement, is inversely proportional to its ease of measurement. This is the Sutherland postulate. Rory Sutherland, I mentioned him in my keynote, but he's the one who came up with this. The value of a measurement is inversely proportional to its ease of measurement. Body count was easy to measure. Hours are easy to measure. Not what customers care about. So yes, it's going to be sometimes difficult to get these measurements, but there's more value in the ones that are harder to measure. All right, here again are my particulars. I've got about 90 seconds, I think, left. So I'm going to flip out to the board here and see if I have any questions. So,
there's a question here, Ed.
Yep.
I'll mention it for you. It says, this is interesting information. For the first of the three, you were looking at HSDs for employees, not the customer question.
That is correct. Yes. HSDs is for the employees or team members. Yep.
Yep. And how is the satisfaction of the employee indicating anything about the customer?
Thank you, Nathaniel. And I think I stated that, maybe you asked this question after, but it's because most of the time when a team member has an HSD, it is because they did something of value for a customer. So that's the idea. Usually, somebody says, "Well, wow, I was able to solve that particularly gnarly problem for that customer," so that generates the HSD. So I hope that makes sense, Nathaniel. All right, I'm not seeing any others. Liz, are you?
One more just popped up from Nathaniel. He says, "Is that always visible to the customer, though?"
It is. It may not be. It may not be visible to the customer. Although that might be something interesting to play with. That perhaps it should be. Perhaps it should be something that's pointed out to a customer that there was something solved on their behalf. Sometimes I think we don't demonstrate enough success to our customers. I think we assume that they see the value, we assume it, but I think that might be a mistake for people to make. So thanks, Nathaniel.
And we are at the top. So if there are any additional questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we can have Ed follow up with you after today. But Ed, great session. I love topics like this. I put a note in the comments that a lot of people use NPS, which is a lagging indicator, right? And
yes,
predictive indicators are definitely the wave of the future. We've used them at past companies of mine, and it really just helps you get ahead of it before it becomes a bigger issue for your company. So thank you so much, Ed. We appreciate it. And everybody can head over to the sessions tab for the next round of sessions. Thank you again.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks all.
Yep.